He sees me. Charlie dropped to her hands and knees. She was wedged behind a row of arcade games, cramped in the crawl space between the consoles and the wall. Tangled electrical cords and endless useless plugs droned beneath her. She was cornered. The only way out was past the thing, and she wasn't fast enough to make it. She could see him stalking back and forth, catching flickers of movement through the gaps between the games. There was scarcely enough room to move, but she tried to crawl backward. Her foot caught on a cord. She stopped, contouring herself to carefully dislodge it. She heard the clash of metal on metal, and the furthest console rocked back against the wall. He hit it again, shattering the display, then attacked the next, crashing against them almost rhythmically. Tearing through the machinery, coming closer. I have to get out. I have to. The panicked thought of was no help was of no help. There was no way out. Her arm ached, and she wanted to sob aloud. Blood soaked through the tattered bandage, and it seemed as though she could feel it draining out of her. The console, a few feet away, crashed against the wall, and Charlie flinched. He was getting closer. She could hear the grinding of gears and the clicking of servos, ever louder. Eyes closed, she could still see the way he looked at her. She see the matted fur and exposed metal beneath the seismic flash. Suddenly, the console in front of her was wrenched away. It tumbled over, thrown down like a toy. The power cords beneath her hands and knees were yanked away, and Charlie slipped, almost falling. She caught herself and looked up in time to see the downward swing of a hook. Welcome to Hurricane, Utah. Charlie smiled wearily at the sign and kept driving. The world didn't look any different from one side of the sign to the other, but she felt a nervous anticipation as she passed it. She didn't recognize anything. Then again, she hadn't really expected to. Not this far at the edge of town where it was all highway and empty space. She wondered what the others would look like, who they were now. 10 years ago they'd been best friends, and then it happened, and everything ended, at least for Charlie. She hadn't seen any of them since she was 7 years old. They had written all the time as kids, especially Marla, who wrote like she talked, fast and innocent. But as they got older, they had grown apart. The letters had grown fewer and further between, and the conversations leading up to this trip had been perfunctory and full of awkward pauses. Charlie repeated their names as though to reassure herself that she still remembered them. Marla, Jessica, Lamar, Carlton, John, and Michael. Michael was the reason for this trip. After all, it was 10 years since he died, 10 years since it happened, and now his parents wanted them all together for a dedication ceremony. They wanted all his old friends there when they announced the scholarship they were creating in his name. Charlie knew it was a good thing to do, but the gathering still felt slightly macabre. She shivered and turned down the air conditioning, even though she knew it was not the cold. As she drove into the town center, Charlie began to recognize things. A few stores and a movie theater, which was now advertising this summer's blockbuster hit. She felt a brief moment of surprise, then smiled at herself. What did you expect? That the whole place would be unchanged? A monument to the moment of your departure, frozen forever in July 1985. Well, that was exactly what she had expected. She looked up at her watch. Still a few hours to kill before they all meet up. She thought about going to the movie, but she knew what she really wanted to do. Charlie made a left turn and headed out of town. 10 minutes later, she pulled to a stop and got out. The house loomed up before her, its dark outline, a wound in the bright blue sky. Charlie leaned back against the car, slightly dizzy. She took a moment to steady herself with deep breaths. She had known it would be there, an innocent look through her aunt's bank books. A few years before she had told her that the mortgage was paid off and that Aunt Jem would still be paying property taxes. It had only been 10 years. There was no reason it should have changed at all. Charlie climbed the steps slowly, taking in the peeling paint. The third stair still had a loose board, and the rose bushes had taken over one side of the porch, their thorns biting hungrily into the wood. The door was locked, but Charlie still had her key. She had never actually used it. As she took it from around her neck and slid it into the lock, she remembered her father putting its chain around her neck. In case you ever need it. Well, she needed it now. The door opened easily, and Charlie looked around. She didn't remember much about the first couple of years here. She had only been 3 years old, and all the memories had faded together in the blur of a child's grief and loss, of not understanding why her mother had to go away, clinging to her father every moment, not trusting the world around her unless he was there, unless she was holding tightly to him, burying herself in his flannel shirts and the smell of grease and hot metal in him. The the stairs stretched up in front of her, but she did not move directly to them. Instead, she went into the living room where all the furniture was still in place. She had not really noticed it as a child, but the house was a little too large for the furniture they had. Things were spread out too widely in order to fill the space. The coffee table was too far from the couch to reach, the easy chair too far across the room to carry on a conversation. There was a dark stain in the wooden floorboards near the center of the room. Charlie stepped around it quickly and went into the kitchen, where the cupboards held only a few pots, pans, and dishes. Charlie had never felt a lack of anything as a child, but it seemed now that the unnecessary enormity of the house was a sort of apology, the attempt of a man who had lost so much to give his daughter what he could. He'd always had a way of overdoing whatever he did. The last time she was here at the house had been dark and everything felt wrong. She was carried up the stairs to her bedroom, although she was 7 years old and could have gone quicker on her own both feet. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this part of me reading some of the Silver Eyes book to you. Sorry I had to go so freaking, short. So anyway, in the next episode, I'll be reading the rest of page 6. So anyway, guys, I'll see you in the next one. Peace!